So, Jurgen Rehm started out in your professional career as, I believe, a graduate student in psychology
Yes, and methodology,
and methodology, experimental psychology.
experimental psychology, and the more I got towards the PhD, I added philosophy of science.
Ah, so how do you get from experimental psychology, methodology, philosophy of science to helping the World Health Organization develop the alcohol and drug parts of the global burden of disease study, and then translating the information that comes out of that massive global public health effort into practical applications by talking to prime ministers around the world to try to convince them to believe the data?
Chance, I would say, is the easiest connection, but it's also true that in what I studied, epidemiology was not existing in Germany. That is one of the late problems of the Nazis. They thought epidemiology was a Jewish science, and epidemiology only came back to German universities in the 1990s. So they were all coming from philosophy of science methodology, and that was one venue.
And did you study epidemiology after psychology?
It was part of the methodology.
Yeah.
So it was part of the training in the methodology, and that's a very strange subject, which is not in international.
Well, epidemiology borrows from everything.
Yeah. So that's where I came from, and I had my focus was on cost effectiveness at the time. And when you talk to different policymakers, that's the first thing they're interested in. So I was hired after studies. I was hired by the German Federal Health Office, and was made responsible for the evaluation of risks. So I was sent to Parliament quite often, and was promoted a little bit too often. And at the end of the day, I said, look, I do not want to go to Parliament and talk about things which I do not believe that there was a real scientific basis. And so I quit my job, went back, and started again as a researcher.
And where did you do that?
The first offer I got was actually from a small Swiss center on alcohol research.
In Zurich?
And now in Lausanne.
Lausanne, okay.
It was, they were looking for somebody, and I applied, and they took me. And this is basically where it started. For me, it was not specifically alcohol at the time. I just wanted to go back into more researchy and into developing policy recommendations which were more based on research. Because coming to German policy and to Parliament, there were little tasks like you have to say if these kinds of new paints can create those headaches. And frankly, without a study, it would be anybody's guess. And I hate to stand in front of Parliament, even though well paid, and to consult on things where I did not have a basis.
Right. How did you get connected with the Global Burden of Disease project?
That was basically working in the field, and I got some calls from Alan Lopez, and he said, well, Jürgen, you know a little bit about alcohol. Can't you get those estimates a little bit better? And then I started the process, and it was quite heavy. And so at the time, WHO had something which said, when actually employed. So whenever I was in Geneva and I tried to be there for 4 or 5 days a month, I was paid for the days I would work at WHO. And I got and that's how I got involved. And basically was lucky because that was the first big hooray. Chris Murray came in, and all of the methodology for comparative risk assessments were developed, not only for alcohol, but for everything. And this is how I was lucky to be one of the first people in this group.
Right. Did you have any doubts, major reservations when they started constructing the foundations of the GBD project and all the assumptions that went behind it, attributable risks and valleys and those kinds of things?
We were all of the spirit at the time that it's only if you put something on the table and give a rationale that people can criticize that it can be improved. And if you look into, I think the first grant for the global burden of disease study was under $100,000. Now it's a triple digit million enterprise, and obviously it is way more refined. But without these very modest beginnings, challenging people's beliefs, spelling out what is necessary, we would not be where we are now.
And where would you rank this particular initiative in terms of innovation and contributions to the improvement of public health in general and specifically in the addiction field?
I think it was very crucial. And it was very crucial not only for the addictions, it was crucial for the wider field of mental health. Alcohol is a risk factor, and alcohol was not well known before the global burden of disease study to be linked to that much burden of disease and to that much kind of mortality. And only in doing those calculations, the overall scope of the contribution of alcohol was known. And then that was taken together with the non-fatal events. And even though people with alcohol use disorders die on average 24 years before the usual life expectancy, it's rarely on a death certificate. And that was something which then had to be teased out. What are the real problems people with alcohol or heavy alcohol consumption die from? How can those be avoided, etc.? And in doing all of those calculations, I think we learned quite a lot.
And what did you learn?
Basically, we are now with the new GBD 2016. Alcohol is still in the top 5 of all the risk factors. And we know that in order to save lives and prolong life expectancy, there is only limited use for health systems. It is mainly other political measures, how we can improve population health. And that is something which still is quite surprising. I was with the health minister of my province in Canada, and he said, how can we had a new calculation that alcohol dependence, if treated, is linked to a loss of life of 24 years on average. Well, we have to do something. And what can we do to, let's say, minimize that to go to first year 19 and then 14? And how much does it cost us in the healthcare system? And I told him, well, actually, go to the feds and try to increase taxes. You'll save more lives than you can with treatments. And I'm not saying that treatments are not effective. They're just not cost effective. And Canada, currently 10% of all people with alcohol use disorders are treated. Obviously, you can save lives if you increase that to 15%, to 20%. But obviously can use way more life with way less resources, if you take one of what we call best buys, and taxation would be the best buy for Canada.
So do you think we've reached the point where we have a scientifically based instrument, almost a process, that allows us to track progress or regression backwards when regulations are relaxed and new products come on the market, more powerful alcohol or drugs? But we have an instrument now that can track what is going forward in terms of increases and decreases in mortality and morbidity. Are we confident enough in that so that we can link that to our policy implementation and eventually perhaps fine tune the health of the population?
I think this is possible. It requires a little bit more of, I would say, courage of politicians to actually use it. But we could backtrack a lot of things. If I can say two examples. One is a little bit historic. Gorbachev, when he came in as the prime minister, but as a minister of economics, he said the biggest problem for Russia at the time was lack of productivity. And he linked that to alcohol. Since that was Soviet times, he had a full control over the whole production, etc. So he really decreased alcohol consumption because he decreased production. Obviously, there was some black market coming up, but black market was not able to just replace all of the legal production. So overall, there was a clear decline of alcohol consumption. And within 4 years, life expectancy for Russian males increased by more than 5 years. And that was quite sensational at the time. And it was in all of the right categories. So you could say, okay, there was something else going on because this is not an experiment. But that was a time when overall the economy of Russia was pretty bad and became worse. So alternative explanations were not that many. And when in 2005, the Russian government again said, we have to do something, they remembered what Gorbachev did. And they did a cascade of policy interventions, at least 10 different ones, and at the same time, which is a nightmare for any researcher, because if you do 10 different interventions and something is successful, you don't know which of the 10 is it. But anyway, they did it. And again, life expectancy now is increasing.
Right.
And that means
that they did the wrong thing?
They did.
Our life expectancy is increasing, or it's not decreasing.
Life expectancy is now increasing.
Yeah.
And that means they did the right thing, but they don't know which one is the right thing out of the 10.
Yeah.
But still, it means that we have now instruments which reliably, even if applied in other countries, will work. Mm-hmm. And let me give you a last example. There's a new party who came into power in Lithuania. And their health minister is quite brave, and he in one shot he tried to implement all the free best buys. So he went with an availability reduction by changing the closing hours. During the night, you can no longer buy alcohol you will not be able to buy alcohol in Lithuania. He increased taxation by 112% for beer and wine and about 30% for spirits. He made a complete ban of marketing and advertisement as of January 2018. And he raised the drinking age in Lithuania, a European classic country, from 18 to 20. I guarantee you that alcohol consumption, alcohol-related mortality will go down almost immediately. And the good thing is that, well, I'm sure that there's not a lot of politicians which are that brave to do all those 4 things at the same time. And there's quite a lot of opposition, and it's one of the highlights of the alcohol industry trying to be against those measures. But it can be evaluated, and we know that certain effects are immediate. The effects on injury, the effects on heart disease, the effects on liver cirrhosis, about 70-80% we can see within 1 year. So anybody who wants to try that out can see the effects. He can go to his voters and say, I promise you, these will be the effects. And if it is not the case, then you could reverse those things, but it will be the case. When we did much less in Switzerland, that if you do this and this and this, and this was a decrease of the blood alcohol concentration per se law, and we said we promise you there will be less injury. Even you don't count alcohol-related injury, which is a subcategory. Just the effect will be so large it will be overall injury. They said, okay, we give you a grant. We didn't need a grant. It was so obvious in the pure statistics.
Right.
You don't need a statistician to
You
show
don't
it.
need a biostatistician. So if what you're saying is true, the research that you've worked on has had a major role in dealing with a major public health issue that has been quite a success story. To what extent are the concepts that you learned about and within public health and the methods in epidemiology, to what extent did they contribute to your being able to translate your research skills into policy? Do you think that made a critical thing, or would you have gone the same way without public health and epidemiology?
No, I couldn't, because every country is different. Their countries have different mortality profiles. In Russia right now, for a number of reasons, injuries are taking a way bigger part of the cake of all mortality than, let's say, in Germany or in Italy. And in order to talk to politicians, they are concerned about their country, and they want their profile, and they want predictions for their profile. And without being able to do those kinds of calculations, I cannot tell them.
Right. So thank you very much, not only for the interview, but for all the stuff that you've done for public health.
Thanks a lot.
Okay.